Hello, everyone. We have a little clip to show you before we get started.
The African National Congress is the alternative force, and it's just a matter of time before the ANC becomes the government in South Africa.
That was a major shock to have someone shot like that, and in such a cowardly manner.
La France a été choquée, vraiment choquée.
Dulcie must have been on to something. To assassinate 80 person in a foreign country is a very big decision for these guys. They could do it in Africa, and they did it quite a lot.
Pourquoi on l'a tuée, elle?
Why?
Why Dulcie at that time?
Que la vraie question, c'est pas qui, c'est la question pourquoi.
A cold case brought to life.
South Africa had made a deal with France for nuclear power. So from the 70s onwards, we were monitoring South Africa's nuclear weapon capability.
Our nuclear program was a huge secret, probably the biggest secret.
R5 trillion was spent between the mid-70s and the early 1990s. If Dulcie September had stumbled across the network of money and weapons and intelligence agents that were supporting the apartheid regime at the time, there's no doubt that she would have been an obstacle to some of those powerful players.
We found that a 17-kilogram bomb was placed on the door of our office, timed to blow us up on Monday morning at 9.
The apartheid regime had agents all over. You had to be looking over your shoulder all the time.
There was definitely decisions made about targets. People were actually on type of a target list.
30 years of searching for answers.
My subjectivity with regard to who I thought that the enemy was, namely the evil racist white minority regime in Pretoria, actually hampered my search for truth. I was chasing right-wing death squads and not looking at the left wing at all for years.
She's investigating something at a time when the entire apartheid edifice is falling apart. And I think that's a particularly dangerous moment to be asking questions.
She might have been onto something that wasn't wanted known then, and perhaps is still not wanted to be known.
Today, the search continues.
We need to question who profited the most from her murder.
Murder in Paris.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's event on Erasing Dulcie September, the story of a racial justice fighter. My name is Alicia Kubas. I am an associate director at the Center for Applied Liberal Arts at NYU School of Professional Studies. The Center for Applied Liberal Arts, in collaboration with the SPS Academy of Lifelong Learning and NYU Africa House, are the hosts of today's event. On behalf of those of us based at NYU's Washington Square campus, I acknowledge that we are located in ancestral Lenape homelands, and we recognize the longstanding significance of these lands for Lenape nations past and present. We are also conscious that New York City has the largest urban Native population in the United States. We believe that historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important and are committed to working to overcome their effects in our own educational institutions. Now, a very brief introduction for those of you who are not familiar with our departments. The Center for Applied Liberal Arts offers continuing education courses and certificates in subjects ranging from professional writing and arts administration to history, literature, language studies, and many more. The NYU Africa House is an interdisciplinary institute devoted to the study of contemporary Africa, focusing on economic, political, and social issues on the continent. Africa House also offers many interesting public events throughout the semester. You can follow the links in the chat box to find out more about these various programs and other upcoming events. We will have time at the end of today's conversation to answer audience questions, so I encourage all of you to please type any questions that you may have for our panelists in the Q&A box below. It is now my honor to introduce today's moderator, Leonard Cortana. Leonard is a fellow at NYU Africa House, a fellow at the UC Santa Barbara Department of Black Studies, a PhD candidate at the NYU Tisch School of the Arts Department of Cinema Studies, and a faculty member at the NYU SPS Center for Applied Liberal Arts. He is also a filmmaker whose last documentary, Marielle's Legacy Will Not Die, follows activist movements spreading the intersectional legacy of Afro-Brazilian activist and politician Marielle Franco. His research focuses on the transnational circulation of narratives about racial justice and activist movements between Brazil, South Africa, France, and the United States. This fall and upcoming spring, Leonard is teaching the award-winning continuing education workshop series at NYU SPS, Racial Literacy and Anti-Racism Practices. Please join me in welcoming Leonard Cortana.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you everyone. And thank you for joining us. I've received emails from different places in the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Our panelists tonight are joining us from South Africa. So thank you once again to be here. Unfortunately, they are experiencing some power failures, but we do hope that everything is going to be fine today for our event. So first of all, it takes a village to organize an event. And I would like to thank once again NYU SPS, Alicia, Afua, Anne, Jenny McPhee for the whole support, Randy also, and the NYU Africa House, Andrea and Nathan for the correspondence and for the support in that event. As Alicia was saying, I'm the recipient of the Robert Holmes Fellowship, giving support for Research Award for African Scholarship. And I would like to thank them for supporting activist research in the African continent. Dulcie September was an anti-apartheid political activist, and she fought during her lifetime the anti-apartheid regime. Forced to exile, she became the chief representative of the ANC bureau in Paris. She's murdered in the very late years of the anti-apartheid regime movement in downtown Paris, in the midst of the French presidential campaign. In the movie that you can watch through the link that is being given upon registration, Murder in Paris, the movie that we are also going to talk about today with our panelist, the director, Enver Samuel, you have one quote from Jen Sanders, an author, saying that you kill usually an activist not only for what they are able to do in the present, but also for the whole stories they will be able to tell for the next generation. And today, this is not a coincidence that we wanted to call this moment and this meeting fighting the unraiser of Dulcie September. In a little bit than 6 months, a little bit less than 6 months, Dulcie's case will be reopened in the French courts, 33 years after her murder. We are here today not only to celebrate the life and the fight of this unsung hero, to fight against her erasure, but also to raise awareness against the injustice, against the impunity of the perpetrators of the crime, but also to mobilize transnational network of advocacy. Today, the director, Enver Samuel, the relatives, and many activists are fighting under the hashtag Justice for Dulcie September. Dulcie was murdered in the pre-internet era, but today we have the means to call as citizens against that murder. Once again, during her lifetime, in many, many ways, many people tried to erase Dulcie September. She was sent to prison. She was banned for public life, forced to send to exile. While she was working in Paris, she was surveilled, intimidated, and then finally murdered. But despite all those different obstacles, she fought. She fought against the apartheid regime. She mobilized, she organized communities. And it's been a pleasure for me in my research to dive into the archives and to look at all the many different ways Dulcie September has been raised as a transnational figure of resistance. NYU SPS Kala has a specific line when we think about teaching. And one of the mission is to think differently. What I would like to say today, when I'm researching about the memorialization process of anti-racist and feminist activists, is that there is another way to tell the story of the conflicts that we've been knowing. There is maybe a way we can remove that narrative of the winners and the losers to bring statistics about the murders, about death, but there is a way we can celebrate the life of the activists that until today are fighting for all the different injustices happening in the world. If we memorialize those activists, if we tell the stories, we will also be able to make it complex and to give much more than an approximate vision of who is the winner and who is the loser. To do so, we'd like to argue of the importance of teaching differently, using activist writings, life stories, the international celebration as a way to know more about all those different movements. And I'm going to share my screen right now to give you some information on the ways we can remember Dulcie September and the ways her life story is shining light about many different events. When I was diving into the archives in Paris, I was really annoyed to see that in the first 3 days when Dulcie September made the headlines because of her murder, she was mostly erased. She became a name, she became an age, and little by little, only people from the government, the presidential candidates, spoke about her. It's more and more with time that activists and different journalists try to go back to Dulcie September, try to bring her life story, try to bring the story of different political activists being murdered in Paris. But it took many, many years to actually be able to speak about who she was and the incredible lifetime story that she had fighting the anti-apartheid regime. One very beautiful story also is that Dulcie September in 1988, when she got murdered, many activists all over the world decided to raise their voices against that murder. In 1988, in April, the first newspaper of the Afro-German movement, Afro-feminist German movement, Afrikete, decided to dedicate their first publication to Dulcie September, raising her with all the different women activists that should be celebrated all over the world as their mother figure of that movement. Throughout the years, Dulcie September was not only remembered by journalists, activists, and scholars, but she's also been transformed. She created an imaginary for many artists to remember her in books, in theater plays, but also in concert and music. Dulcie September became songs, Dulcie September became story, Dulcie September became a whole imaginary to fight racism and gender injustice. And before we are going to start our event today, I would like to give us a minute to read at her poetry. Usually when women activists are being murdered, we remember their face. We remember a little bit of their life stories, but we hardly remember their words and their intellectual production. Dulcie September spent her lifetime writing discourses, meeting people all over France to discuss what was happening in South Africa, to discuss the biases of the mainstream national media around her persona, but also around all the different activist movements trying to fight the apartheid regime. So I just would like to take a moment, and I don't want to read it, but I just want everyone to take a moment and to look at the words, at the poetry of Dulcie September as a way to remember her and as a way to celebrate also the intellectual production that she's giving us. I would like now to introduce our first panelist, Nicola Arendse. She's the niece of Dulcie September. She's also a social worker. She's an addiction therapist, and she's going today to speak about the fight of the family and the relatives to call out for justice, to reopen the case, but also to celebrate the legacy of Dulcie September in South Africa. Welcome, Nicola Arendse. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll let you explain the situation.
Thank you, Leonard. Good afternoon or good evening to my fellow panelists and participants. And I think, first of all, just on behalf of the family of Dulcie September, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to the organizers of this event, to Leonard, to the NYU SBS Center for Applied Liberal Arts, and the NYU Africa House. 33 years have passed since my aunt was assassinated. My mother was Dulcie's only living sister. My parents attended her funeral and tried to understand and appreciate what was happening around them and what had been happening in Dulcie's life. I think we need to remember at that time we really didn't know what she was involved in, what work she was doing. We had no idea. My parents had last seen her alive in 1979 when they visited her in London. And in the 33-year period since her death, my father died in 2005. My mother died in 2016, and they never had the opportunity to know who was responsible for her murder. In 1992, 4 years after the assassination, the criminal case in France was closed, and subsequent appeals and attempts by the family to have the case reopened were unsuccessful. This necessitated a different approach by the family, and under the guidance of Yves Laurent, the lawyer, our family lawyer in France, it was decided that a civil case would be launched against the French state for denial of justice. A civil case would have a trial, an opportunity to plead, and a judgment. It would also allow for a full hearing of all the issues of law and fact. In 2003, apartheid was accepted as a crime against humanity in French law. And since prescription does not apply in crimes against humanity, we needed to get France to recognize that apartheid was a crime against humanity before it was accepted into law in France in 2003. If we could reach this point, we would have a fighting chance. And in September 27th of this year, the Tribunal of Paris ruled that no prescription applied regarding the ruling of the prosecutor of Paris in 2019 and the ruling of the general prosecutor in 2020. Thus, justice had been denied, and the case could be reopened if new evidence is produced. So what would the new evidence be? So that would certainly be one, the book by Evelyn Groening, Incorruptible, regarding the assassination of Dulcie, and Henny van Vieren, the director of Open Secrets book titled Apartheid, Guns and Money. And both books, of course, had been meticulously researched, and they spent long years trying to unpack what had happened, and Henny specifically also focused on the role Dulcie had played in France and in weapons procurement and the whole weapons trade. Then, of course, the documentary that we are looking at and talking about this evening, Murder in Paris by Enver, again, through his process of research, interviews, investigations, produced a plethora of information, substance that can be presented. And then thirdly, also, the show of public support through the Justice for Dulcie campaign petition, which is addressed to the Justice Minister of France, showing the support of the members of the public for the reopening of the case. Because all these measures, the new evidence especially, it helps to strengthen and validates the reopening of the case. The next key date is the hearing, which will take place on April the 4th in 2022. This hearing allows for the checking of written exchanges and planning of the final hearing. And that date in April, it seems to be a preparatory step towards the civil hearing. And it is the hope of the family that the civil hearing date, where the process would actually then start, will be quite soon after the April 4th date. Early in September, also the Nelson Mandela Foundation agreed to become a friend of the court, and we are grateful for the role they have played, and continue to play in the search for justice for my aunt. As for the case in South Africa, I'm afraid to say that we will not be able to be party to the class action lawsuit that was planned by the apartheid-era victims' families group against President Ramaphosa to compel him to reopen all the TRC cases that remain unsolved. The reason being that SA statute doesn't extend to events that happened overseas, outside of South African borders. Recently, and when I say recently, as in the last few days, there have been developments in South Africa with the Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, announcing that the NPA has agreed to appoint 23 prosecutors to specialize in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission cases that were never solved, and 34 Hawks investigations. The Hawks is a specialized investigation unit. And they've been given 3 years, a period of 3 years, to complete their work. They're thinking that it has already taken too long, and 3 years seen as a suitable period to get the matters sorted. So we hope that things will develop in the case as we move along. Unfortunately, my parents couldn't be part of that. But we hope that slowly, through pressure, through the valuable work done through people like Enver, through Evelyn, through Henny van Vieren, through the support by structures, organizations, that we will eventually find justice for my aunt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you very much for your testimony. And we can now play the second extract before we actually meet Enver Samuel.
That the African National Congress is the alternative force, and it's just a matter of time before the ANC becomes the government in South Africa. Thank you.
She went to Lusaka and she worked in the treasury.
Feisty lady, a fighter. She had so much energy, unstoppable almost. Her laughter could be heard way outside the offices where she was based. Oh, I have so many memories of Dulcie.
I assumed her not to be in with the male-dominant forces in the ANC that I got to know. I thought they wouldn't take her seriously enough. The common denominator in the ANC of a boys' club prevailed strongly. Dulcie did not easily fit into that.
The question that is being posed: is the ANC not used to working with women as equals?
She was fearless. If she had anything on her mind, she was so straightforward about her responses. It didn't matter who it was, what office they occupied. Truth had to be told. Dulcie was there to do it. And so that's why she was a force within the women's section of the ANC.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the extract. It was very important for us to remind the audience that you can access the movie until Friday upon registration to watch this beautiful movie, Murder in Paris, produced by South African film director Enver Samuel. And in this extract, it's very important to see that Enver has made an amazing investigation work to find all the different people that memorialize Dulcie today in all the different fights and identities that she was representing. So before I'm welcoming Enver, I would like to present him. Enver Samuel is a film director and producer. He's known for his documentary film Indians Can Fly and the documentary Murder in Paris, which will become a legal resource for the trial opening in 6 months in Paris. Enver was born in South Africa and grew up in England, Ghana, and Zambia. Enver has worked on numerous television production and high-profile corporate videos for the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Kaiser Family Foundation, amongst others. Enver is a current board member for the Documentary Filmmakers Association, DFA. He acts as a mentor producer for the KwaZulu-Natal Film Commission. Enver has traveled extensively overseas and has wealth of experience traveling in Africa, having visited over 30 countries on the continent. Thank you so much, Enver, for joining us today. Thank you so much for this beautiful movie, but also the social campaign that you're leading with the family. And I'm leaving you some time to explain the work that you've been doing to create that piece that took you, I know, many, many years to realize. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you for having me, and thank you to New York University. It is a pleasure to meet Leonard and see his passion and dedication to helping with unerasing the name of Dulcie September. So we really appreciate that. I think for me, as a journey, the making of Murder in Paris began almost 4 years ago in 2017. And I won't be giving you like a Hollywood answer in terms of I was born to tell the documentary, I was born to make the documentary. It was a simple chance meeting with Randolph Arendse, Nicola's uncle in Switzerland, who happened to be at a documentary festival that I was attending. And he said to me, why don't you make a documentary on Dulcie September? And once we had established that contact, I followed that up when I got back to South Africa with Nicola and Michael Arendse, the nephew and niece who are living in Cape Town. So that's how it began. And I think what gripped me with the story of Dulcie September was the fact that here was someone who was to a very large extent erased. Her name was not that well known in circles in South Africa. I mean, if you were in circles like with ANC, then they would know. But in the general population, the name Dulcie September was not known. And I'm sure. I mean, even if I was to do an exercise of asking people to put up their hands and say, who knew Dulcie September before watching the documentary, you generally get a very, very low response. So for me as a filmmaker, that was the thing that gripped me and fascinated me, is this sort of unerasure of someone that on investigation and on research had done remarkable things. If you watch the documentary and you look at the archive that I unearthed in France, in Paris, during her funeral, and the streets of Paris are lined with some saying figures of up to 20 to 60,000, ranging in that sort of area of people that came out to the funeral of Dulcie September. And that struck me, how come so many people at home don't know who this lady was, and yet the streets of Paris were lined with thousands and thousands of people who came to pay their respects to her on the funeral. Then I began my journey of trying to uncover and unravel the mystery box, or Pandora's box, of Dulcie September, because when you open one door, it leads to another opening of another door and another door and another door. But essentially, during the crucial stage of research, in particular at the University of Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, where a big deal of Dulcie's archive is kept, I was pointed in some directions, and I almost took on became a sort of investigator, private investigator, if you will, and then came across the name Evelyn Koenig, who has written the book Incorruptible on Dulcie September, Dutch investigative journalist who has this quest to find the killers of Dulcie, and it struck me that I should use her as my sort of inciting incident person to tell the story of Dulcie, and when I found out that she lives in Pretoria, which is outside Johannesburg, it kind of even made it more compelling for me to tell the story. I didn't have to go and hunt for her in Holland, but she was right here in South Africa. And together with Evelyn, I think it drives the documentary in a way that gives it that investigative element. And I think Evelyn's an interesting and fascinating character. I must say that the 4-year journey to make the documentary was not an easy one. There were always problems of raising funding, approaching the ANC, drew a blank, and many other areas. There was practically no interest. But eventually, through foundations like the Nelson Mandela Foundation, we were able to overcome that big obstacle. The National Film and Video Foundation, the Gauteng Film Commission, all contributed in small ways to making the documentary come alive and be told. Once the documentary was complete, about 4 years later, in March this year, on Human Rights Day, our Human Rights Day, March the 23rd, it was broadcast to the South African television, to the SABC 3. And it had a very successful launch. The broadcasters were quite pleased with the audience ratings, and were even made to comment that they hadn't seen such ARs, audience ratings, for a documentary in many years. So for us, that was a very successful launch of the documentary. Essentially, what it meant was that over close to 1 million people in South Africa watched that documentary, and if one could say, up to a certain extent, a large volume of that figure would have been finding out about Dulcie September for the first time. So this un-erasure of Dulcie September continues, and it's continuing with our social impact campaign that we have, which is quite a vigorous campaign, with its attempts to further put out the name of Dulcie September within the South African community at large. We're doing this in many ways. We're taking the documentary to schools. We have quite a successful run at schools, and whenever we start off the documentary, combined with an educational guide on Dulcie September, the first question is, who knows the name Dulcie September? And almost every single hand goes up and says, we don't know who the name Dulcie September is. So for us, every school classroom of 30 that get to watch and get to engage with the educational guide, it's 30 more new people that now know the name Dulcie September. And as Nicola has said, I think for the family, one of the biggest things is to get answers. And now that after their hard work, and in particular the lawyers in France, we are finally getting to have the case reopened in April, and we hope that some headway can be made with this important time, because if you watch the documentary and you engage with the family, you come to learn very quickly that despite the passage of time, that the answers that are not answered, because it's like a festering sore, and it sits with you for many decades, and it is something that needs closure. I would just like to say, just with regards to the timing of the period of the documentary, 1988, because we forget, we tend to forget. We were called the Rainbow Nation. We had the successful transition to our elections in 1994, but one quickly forgets the time that Dulcie September was operating in. And in particular of 1985 to 1989, and 1988, when the year Dulcie September was assassinated, where there were wars on the border, there were wars in the township, there were orders to eliminate activists. That was part and parcel of the language, elimination, take them out, orders to kill. So this is the sort of milieu that Dulcie September was working in, and I think we should appreciate the courageous woman that Dulcie September was, working in that environment in France. She had the opportunity to leave at one point, but that was not part of her makeup, and she stayed till the end. And even with the fights with the ANC in terms of recognition of women, there was this character of Dulcie September that I think makes her stand out, and for someone that has not really had a name up there, I think it's time that we start to recognize the heroes and heroines of the South African struggle that paid with their lives ultimately. And in some way, the documentary shows a light on who Dulcie September was. Yeah, I think I've talked quite a bit, so I'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Enver. Thank you very much for this beautiful documentary that once again is accessible for all the participants until Friday and will become a legal resource for the trial in 6 months. I would like now to ask Anne to play the last video clip for today, which is a video clip from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission before I'm welcoming Vern Harris to our panel.
Thank you very much. Be seated.
In respect of the murder of Dulcie September in Paris, what steps in the aftermath of that did you take to establish whether there was any South African involvement in relation to that matter?
It came to us in Foreign Affairs as a severe shock, because an event of that nature can't happen, whether you like Dulcie September or not. It doesn't matter. It is bad stuff. It is bad for South Africa. Just bad, and it carries on for months. And in a case like this, all that we could do, we had no spying service on our own, is you inquire. I would, on occasions like this, perhaps call in the French ambassador.
Thank you very, very much, Anne. So as we shape that event together to think about memorialization, but also calling out for justice, so we invited the family and the legal action that they are doing, the artist and the filmmaker, also raising awareness through the social campaign. And we also wanted to invite the archivist and the historian, who is going to be also able to raise the history of Dulcie September and to participate in this restorative justice process. So we introduce Vern Harris. He is the head of the Nelson Mandela Foundation Leadership and Knowledge Development Process. He was Mandela's archivist from 2004 to 2013, directed the Foundation's Archives program for 15 years and the Dialogue and Advocacy program for 5 years. He is an adjunct professor at the Nelson Mandela University, participated in a range of structures which transformed South Africa's apartheid archival landscape, including the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and is a former deputy director of the National Archives. He has authored and co-authored 6 books, the most recent one being Ghost of Archives. Thank you very much for being with us today, Vern. And I let you now some time to discuss your work and the work that you've been doing for Dulcie September.
Well, thank you, Leonard, and greetings to everybody. I first engaged directly with the assassination of Dulcie September in the late 1990s, when I was serving in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I was specifically a member of an investigation team that was looking into the destruction of records by the apartheid state. The purpose of this was really to document who had been erasing this memory, why, but most importantly, we wanted to locate, secure, and then make available to the other Truth Commission investigation teams the records which had survived those processes. In 1999, it was brought to my attention that 34 boxes of Truth Commission files had been removed from the Commission and were then under the control of our National Intelligence Agency. I didn't know it at the time, but included in these boxes were the files of the Truth Commission's investigation into Dulcie September's assassination. So 1999, that initiated a long journey for me and a number of colleagues, which started with whistleblowing, moved into litigation, and into support for people having a direct interest in the contents of those 34 boxes. One of the families who came to us, and when I say us, I was in 2002 working for a small freedom of information NGO, and Michael Arendse came to us, having seen the list of files in those 34 boxes which we had just published. So this became part of a larger journey. The upshot of it was that the files in those boxes were transferred from national intelligence to the National Archives. And if memory serves me, about 65% of the files have now been placed in the public domain. Sadly, however, the files related to the Dulcie September assassination are still locked away, we assume, in the National Archives still. And this is not an isolated case. Let me say that when Nelson Mandela stepped down as president of the country in 1999, the intention was very clear in relation to the work of the Truth Commission. It was to be a springboard for continuing work, including pursuing those investigations which hadn't been completed, prosecuting those perpetrators of human rights violations who had not been given amnesty, and making the Truth Commission's own archive as widely accessible as possible. Well, these things did not happen. And I think it is a question that we can discuss. Why? Who closed down the continuing work? And listening now to Nicola talking about the recent announcements, it is a question for me. Why now does the South African state announce its intention to pick up on this difficult work? Will it actually follow through and implement? Does it have the will and the capacity to do this work? I've been at the Nelson Mandela Foundation since 2004, and it was in 2007 that Nelson Mandela gave the organization a new mandate. Up until then, we had been his post-presidential office, doing a wide range of things that he was passionate about. And as he stepped away from public life, he gave us this new mandate, which included contributing to processes designed to enable South Africa to reckon with its past. The apartheid past, but also the longer colonial past. And it was within the frame of that kind of work that we met with Enver. We supported the making of the documentary. We added our voice, as Nicola was saying, to the call for the state investigation in France to be reopened. Just a few months ago, our chief executive had a face-to-face meeting with President Macron and raised this matter. So we continue to support the work. I think that we are faced by very powerful forces which will make this work very difficult. We are supporting the announcement that the work of the Truth Commission, especially in relation to prosecutions and completing investigations that were left incomplete, that this will happen, and we will continue to do advocacy work around that. I'll stop there. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vern. So I would like now to invite all the panelists to turn on their camera, and I'm going to ask you a question to each of you. Maybe we will have a time for a collective question, and meanwhile, I will invite the audience to send their question through the chat box so that we will be able to actually address them during the Q&A. So my first question goes to you, Nicola. And we already had an event to another university, at Harvard University, about the campaign. And you said something that really impacted me at the time, that you discovered that you were a niece, actually, when you started working on the memory of Dulcie. And one of the questions that I have for you, how you become a public figure while merging different private histories and private memory of your family, but at the same time bringing it to the audience, to the public, to be able to speak about Dulcie in all the different identities that she was. What is the impact for someone from the family to become a public figure and to bring this history family to the public?
I think, in short, a challenging process, but a process that allows for engagement, and it allows for growth and personal challenging, because again, as there is engagement with other people, researchers, people like Enver, it's also the appreciation of what it means to them to be doing the work that they are doing, and sometimes just to sit back and say, wow, to be aware of how other people see her different to what I had grown up with. You know, she was my aunt. She was an auntie, you know. We didn't know much. It's only in the last few years that we were able to gain more information about what she had done, because the reality of her life, what she had experienced, the work she was doing, the people she was working with, was all a mystery to us. So it's been very much a process of discovery and a reappreciation of who she was, and then also a process of being open to share that with others. So I've had to also look at what impact and how my sharing of her can also impact other people. And so there is that awareness of an obligation to be part of events, be it on this scale or be it on a one-to-one scale. Wherever the opportunity presents itself, there is an obligation to share and to engage. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicola. Enver, it's also very important to address the film director that you are, that we speak about the film itself, because, you know, your movie become a kind of a social text when we speak about the assassination of Dulcie, the importance of justice, the time of the apartheid, but we also need to speak about the aesthetics and the whole work that you put in the production. The movies stand out for me because I watched many activist movies as a brilliant use of the archives, the figure and the persona of Dulcie September coming in so many times in the narrative, but also a very speedy editing when we are just like crossing oceans, location, and different witnesses, but coming as a whole, giving that impression that everyone has a story about Dulcie, everyone knows her public work, but also has something to share about her private life. How do you create an aesthetics, merging both these archives, but also this idea of a transnational figure between France, England, and South Africa in the same work?
Thank you, Leonard. I think as a filmmaker, it was very complex to knit it all together. You know, and because it was a stop-start process, so it wasn't one continuous 4-year block of working on the documentary. It was a stop-start process. Work on projects that brought in some income, and then do the labor of love in between. So there was a wealth of footage that I accumulated over the years. Many ways also because I'm that type of person in terms of for me everything starts with the research, and you know, after accumulating a lot of research, both in the archive and in sort of print and print media and that type of thing, one had to then sit and figure out how to put all this together. And in fact, in a strange way, COVID came, and in March 2020, I was forced to be at home for more than 6 months, and that was the breakthrough period on the documentary. Was working basically for 6 months nonstop on the documentary, and trying to weave and knit together the complexities of the narrative, the combination of the archive, what do you put in, what do you leave out, but in a strange way, working with my longtime collaborator and editor, and Dr. Nikki Komnenos, we managed to I mean what you see obviously is after like 10 or 15 cuts. So eventually we managed to find what we thought was a flow, and I think you know, it was difficult, you know, but in the end we managed to I think put out something that can grip an audience. You know, it's not just a history lesson on who Dulcie was, but it's an interesting take on the time and the back figures that are involved.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vern, I have a question for you around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is seen as a prominent space restorative justice process all over the world. So today you have to work not only with the cases of those unsung heroes and also to spread the legacy of Nelson Mandela, but also you live with the legacy of the commission itself. Some people say that it was a failure. Some others speak about the importance that on screen people could watch and follow all the different discussions during the commission. How do you work simultaneously with the legacy of the commission, but also diving into those portraits and diving into that research and that archives, for instance, for Dulcie September and all those unsung heroes that were erased during that time?
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. You ask a difficult question. Let me say that I think the Truth Commission did provide the springboard that Nelson Mandela and the rest of the leadership had in mind, but that the springboard was very deliberately and very systematically dismantled. And I'll give you just one anecdote to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, is that I was in government throughout Nelson Mandela's presidency. And after the initial report of the Truth Commission in 1998 had been published, every government department was instructed to study the report and its recommendations and to begin identifying how it would contribute to implementing the recommendations of the Commission. It didn't take very long, though. After Mandela stepped down, is for the message to come through very clearly: stop this work. The archive itself, and you ask a question which is a very painful one for me, because I was part of the team which secured the Truth Commission's own archive, and we had developed plans to ensure that this archive was the most accessible, publicly accessible. And the Commission itself had recommended that we set up centers of memory around the country and continue the memory work which had been started. And again, I say very quickly, it didn't even take a year after Nelson Mandela stepped down for the instructions to come through that, no, this archive needs to be locked up and secured. And very quickly, it became apparent that it's not going to be easy for anybody to get access to this archive. And it's one of our tragedies, because I think it speaks to a much broader process of betrayal, of choosing very deliberately not to reckon with our past and to make a future which is doomed to failure. So for me, the work of archive is not about the past. It's about what is the future that you are making. And that's why the project that Enver has been involved with, the continuing work in relation to Dulcie September, is so important, because it's not about that past. There are dimensions that are about getting answers to questions, getting clarity on who was responsible for what. But it's also about the future that we are making for the family, for our communities, for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vern. And you give me actually a very good transition for a question that I have for all the panelists. When we think about Dulcie's case, we both spread her legacy, but also call out for justice. So it's almost if we have that tension between the past, the present, and the future, knowing that also today you have a new generation of scholars, activists coming and reclaiming the figure of Dulcie September as a way also to raise the figure of women activists. I wanted to ask you, as a collaboration between different actors, how do you deal with that tension of both spreading the legacy and also calling out for justice? And how does it translate in this cross-sector collaboration that you are all doing in this work?
Leonard, if you allow me, just actually on a follow-up on Vern, because just this week I was at our SABC, our national broadcaster, searching through their archive for my next series, which is on the TRC, 6 cases on that were in the TRC, and I came across a tape, and it said pointing out of grave sites, and just in terms of the question you posed to Vern, and this was the pointing out of the gravesite of Portia File Ndwandwe, who was an ANC commander, kidnapped from Swaziland, brought back, tortured for 10 days, and because she didn't spill the beans on her comrades, she was eventually shot in the head and buried in an unmarked grave. And you know, her family for more than 10 years did not know where she was, and she was presumed to be in exile. And because of the TRC, and because of the dangling of the carrot at the end of the stick for the security police with amnesty, they pointed out the gravesite. And in that footage, you see them pointing out the gravesite, and then they dig up the gravesite and exhume the bones. And these bones were able to give the family closure, albeit in tragic circumstances, but they did get closure because of something from the TRC. Yeah, I just thought I'd put that in because it happened this week.
Thank you very much, Enver. So is there any answer or reflection about that cross-sector collaboration between spreading legacy, but also calling out for justice and working with different actors, not only in South Africa, but also all over the world to do this work?
I think, Leonard, if I can just say something, being a family member, it comes with the territory. And I think just sometimes being in conversation with people already brings it to the fore. So just sharing the family story already brings it up, raises that. But I think it's about how one engages with it, because it's a human story. It's a story of a family experience and a family tragedy. But it's also then in the context of a much bigger picture and history of our country. And I think one of the areas that has surprised me is how people are willing to get to know more about the story without necessarily feeling offended or getting defensive, but to learn more we don't know. Or maybe I should also just consider, I haven't spoken with people that have vastly conflictual approaches to my own. I'm not there yet. I'm not saying I haven't, but it's been my experience that there has been this openness with regards to wanting to learn more and to know more. But I was also aware of just how much more work then there is to be done in that regard. If so many ordinary people are not aware, there's a hell of a lot of work we need to do in the un-erasure, in the memorializing of people like my aunt, you know, and that as there is again that aspect of obligation that comes to me as a family member. And I think it's just part of it that I carry with me for the rest of my life, just being who I am. But telling the story becomes important, and because it's also a human story, a very human story, and that appeals to people. Yeah. Thank you.
Enver, do you want to share about that question?
I think within the,
Leonard, you can see that the electricity came on.
I think within the South African context, with regards to the past, we cannot move forward without re-examining the past. I think it's an area that we're still coming to grips with. So yeah, and the story of Dulcie September is an example of that.
And how do you approach actually different actors like the Nelson Mandela Foundation, but also like the film festival? How do you work with different industry and different ways of working to actually follow the same objective, to give justice to Dulcie?
I think, well, I mean, it's a multi-pronged approach in terms of, you know, as part of the social impact campaign is to get the documentary out there. And so far, we have been very pleased with the results we've been getting in terms of festival acceptance. So festivals are identifying with the message. So because, I mean, a festival won't take you just because they feel sorry for you. There has to be some identification, you know, that they realize that this is something that has synergy. So we're lucky that there's been synergy, and in that way the message is getting out there. So I guess we've been lucky that we are having a successful rollout of the documentary.
Thank you. I just wonder if there is some question from the audience. Alicia, do you have some question from the audience?
Hello. Yes, there isn't anything that hasn't been answered yet. So I do encourage anyone who's in the audience right now. We are just past the hour, and we have a couple minutes left, that if you also wanted to share anything you wanted to add or your reflections on today's conversation, you're free to do that. And you could actually click on the raise hand icon at the bottom, and you could just verbalize your comments. I can put you on the screen without a problem. So please do let us know if there's anything. The only thing, you know, it's a question for Nicola. It's great that Dulcie September is now increasingly being recognized as a role model for other activists, but you are a role model as well. As a family member, you help us remember that there's a family context to all of this. And I just, you know, when somebody like Dulcie pays the ultimate price for her work, it can be very difficult. You have to grieve, but there's also the work of the case and the campaign for visibility. I mean, what does it take from a family's perspective to be able to do this kind of work? Do you have meetings, or, you know, on holidays? Do you know, how is there, what kind of, are you reaching out to other family members, or how does all of that happen? And what advice can you give to other families?
Not easy. I think because of it's been 33 years, and initially, early years, there wasn't much known, and there was a lot of questions, a lot of mystery. But I think also you need to understand the context within which my parents had lived, was that for safety's sake, you don't ask questions. You don't rock the boat. And I think for them, as part of protecting us, was not to almost encourage us to get too much involved, because they were scared something similar would happen to us too, in that regard. Because we're looking still at the 80s, late 80s. There was a lot happening in the country at that time. So certainly there was risk involved if one spoke too much. if one was too outspoken, you know, in that respect. Interestingly, I mean, early years when I was a student at that time, I joined the African National Congress at the time. And my mother expressed concern, but she didn't stop me. She knew it was something I wanted to do. She was concerned that where the meetings were and all of that kind of a thing, but she didn't stop me to actually, you know, be part of that. Yeah, so we talk, and I think also what has happened in the last few years is engaging with other families who are going through something similar, and more, you know, also being able to listen to their stories, so that shared experience is important. But I think engaging too little, because the opportunities are very limited. You know, in that respect, it's only through activities now related to the anorexia, through webinars, through presentations and talks, that we were able to now also meet up with family members who may also be present, you know, in that regard. So it's also just been a way of how we need to organize ourselves, also as a group, you know, to support each other, but also to work together, you know, and work towards justice for each family, who are very much also struggling and coming to terms, but then also through that translating that into action towards justice, not only for each family member, but for the country also, because it's very much, it's in our stories and in the many untold stories that there is still so much healing which needs to take place, and so making space for sharing those stories, listening to stories is so important. So whenever I get the opportunity, I do try and engage in that respect. So it's about using the hurts, the grieving process, for and translating that into a positive process, you know, of we all need healing, and that there's still so much healing work to be done in that process. So in that way, the meaningfulness comes from I have a role to play in that healing work that needs to take place and is still taking place. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I have a question for Vern from the audience. I will merge it with one of mine also, and thank you for coming back. I'm very happy that the power came back. So my question will be around the extensive and incredible work that you're doing in the archive, that is not only documenting South Africa, but also the connection with other countries and other transnational networks of advocacy. So how do you work on that, and how you create also collaboration through the Nelson Mandela Foundation with other countries? And the question that I have is, what is or has been Desmond Tutu's position on digging up old stories that the ANC seems to have issues with? How do international icons like Tutu deal with all this hidden her story, his story? This is a question from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Archbishop Tutu is on record talking about the ways in which the ANC governments after Nelson Mandela began a very deliberate and systematic strategy of suppressing those stories and those initiatives. Your question about the global dimension, I think for us, what is of fundamental importance is that South Africa made many mistakes in the 1990s, and we continue to make mistakes. We need to learn from other countries. We need to learn from especially countries of the global south. And I say this in a context where under Nelson Mandela's leadership, we made the fatal mistake of trying to implement models and strategies from the global north in the main. So if you look at our education system, we tried to transform the apartheid education system using models from Canada and Australia. We did not look at what Zimbabwe was doing, what Tanzania, what Brazil were doing. So the work that we're doing now globally is very much about moving away from what was, I think, a South African exceptionalism, where we thought we could do things that others could not do. And also sharing, our experiences of failed strategies. What do other countries have to learn from that? Let me also just say, in terms of your previous question before I got cut off, but linking it to Nicola's response a moment ago as well, is that this work that we've been talking about is inseparable. If we talk about the work of making a just society, it's inseparable from all the other related work that is reckoning with the past. So land restitution, redistribution of wealth, Black economic empowerment, all of these things need to be seen as a whole. And the work that stopped in the late 1990s, in my view, it needs to be done now. And that's the work that we try to contribute to. It's not justice in the narrow sense of determining what happened, who was responsible, and punishing those who were responsible. It's that broader sense of justice, of making a just society that is inclusive and that is livable for all. And in my view, is pro-poor and pro-Black, because that's what we're seeing right now as the consequences of a state, of a government that has not implemented those kinds of policies yet. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this answer. And it's clearly visible that the work of the three of you, you also address all those very important issues happening today in the South African landscape, and that Dulcie September can also be that figure raising all those different political agenda. If there is no other question, I have a conclusive question for our panelists before we wrap up. Alicia, is there any other question or?
Yeah, so go ahead, Leonard.
Thank you, Alicia. My conclusive question is, what now? What can we do? How can we work from the US, from different countries? We have people listening to us maybe from Brazil, from Europe, from Asia. How can we, as an international audience, international allies, help the case, help to raise awareness? And what is the emergency today to support 6 months away from the reopening of the case in the French courts?
Nicola, do you want to come in? I think we've lost Enver.
Yeah, it seems like.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah. Okay. So I think part of it is then, as much as possible, to spread the word, support the campaign, sign up on the social media platforms, participate in events such as these, and where possible, if you can also organize your own events in that regard. All of those measures help, and continue to follow what is happening with the processes which we are engaging in at that time. I mean, Enver and his team has done a lot of work with the Impact campaign, with the Justice for Dulcie campaign, and all of those are accessible on various social media platforms. But part of it is also talking about it in the classrooms, workspaces, in that respect. And I think also part of that is also supporting related areas, other people also who are involved, because it's about a network. It's not just a soul. It's about, and we all need each other's support. I think that is so important, and the learning from each other's experience. But the support is key in that regard. So I think where possible, engage, where possible, support, sign up, use the social media platforms, and spread the word. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Enver is back. I don't know if you heard the question, Enver. It seems that he's stuck again.
Frozen.
Yeah. So Leonard, I think Nicola has answered so well. I don't have anything to add to that. Thank you.
Maybe can you just add something about the Nelson Mandela Foundation activities that are related to this work that we are talking today? Maybe some action also that we can support?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're involved in so many different projects. One that I would name that is, for me, closely related is the work we're doing around displays of the old apartheid flag. We've been involved in litigation on this. We've secured an equality court ruling which says that displays of that old flag constitute hate speech. Supporting that work would be valued by us. Just to say, support can also be financial. I mean, this kind of work costs money, whether you're making a documentary or whether you're fighting a case in a court. And for civil society in South Africa, funding is becoming more and more challenging. So support across the board, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. And I don't know if you heard my question. That was just a question, what to do now? How can people from all over the world can support? What is the emergency? How can we help raising awareness, organizing events? What can we do to spread the word?
I think with the date now confirmed for April, I think as much interest as we can generate around that date and get sort of global response to that. I think it could be the impetus to seeing much more happening with the case.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So before I'm going to leave Alicia concluding the event today, I would like to thank you, Nicola, Vern, and Enver for this conversation, for being so generous in your answers, but also speaking about those challenging times and episodes of the history of South Africa. I'm also very grateful for NYU SPS, and Africa House to do that work, that anti-racist work that we're engaging, because celebrating anti-racist and feminist figure is part of the fighting racism and fighting gender discrimination. So I would like to thank you everyone for this really beautiful moment of sharing, to tell people that they can still watch the movie until Friday, that they can look for different activities through the social campaign, the website. It's all in our event description, the work of Vern in the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and to keep on celebrating the life of Dulcie September. Justice for Dulcie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.